Fantastic. I want to welcome everyone who has joined us this evening to AngelMD's Pitch Club, which tonight is focused on women's health and pediatrics. We have three great companies here with us tonight. And for those of you that haven't been to Pitch Club before, I'm going to talk a little bit about the purpose. Each of our presenters tonight is going to give a 7-minute pitch, and then we will allow for 5 minutes of Q&A from our attendees, all of you. We would love for you to use the Q&A function to put your questions, to ask your questions, which should be along the bottom panel, the last icon to the right. And again, the purpose of Pitch Club really is for these startups and startup founders to get some clinical feedback. It's for fun, it's for interest. We know there's a lot of clinicians that are joining us, and we are excited, or our companies are excited, to be able to share what they have been working on. And you're also going to get an opportunity to give some feedback to these founders. And after each company presents, there will be a poll that will pop up, a Zoom poll, and that will be your opportunity to give feedback. That we take all the feedback that you give us, and we send those directly on to each of our CEOs and presenters that we have here this evening. I'm going to start with a few introductions tonight. I haven't introduced myself, but I'm Katie Richardson. I'm a pediatrician by training. I'm also the Vice President of Clinical Relations for AngelMD, so welcome to all of you. And I'm also going to introduce some other members of the AngelMD team. Excuse me. We have Tobin Arthur, who's our founder and executive chairman. We're just going to see his photo tonight because he had some conflicts, but he's here with us just a little bit more virtually than usual. Then we have Jennifer Arthur, who is our CEO of membership. And we also have Mike Szymanski, and Mike is our head of finance and investment. So thank you for being here as well. We have, in addition to our startup founders and CEOs, we have a special guest, Dr. Tig Parrish, who is an OBGYN from Kaiser Permanente, and she is going to be grilling our OBGYN company for tonight, or hopefully not, but we're happy to have you here, Tig. Thanks for being here to help us out. All right, so without further ado, look at that, I'm right on time. We are going to start with our first pitch of the night. And we have with us Dr. Robin Shandis, who is our CEO of Entero Track. So Robin, you can go ahead and share your screen, and we will allow you to get started on your pitch. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Great. No, thank you. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Mike. So I assume everybody can see this, the screen okay? So,
we can.
Okay, thank you. So I'm pleased to pitch Entero Track, a startup company with substantial traction and potential. As Katie said, I'm Robin Shandis. I'm the CEO of the company. We have a few people from our team also in the audience, and they can answer other questions as well. So by way of context, let me present the background and the problem. So eosinophilic esophagitis, or EOE, and gastroesophageal reflux disease, or GERD, are common disorders with no cure. Both require a lifetime of frequent esophageal monitoring. EOE is also the leading cause of emergency room visits due to food impaction. And as you can imagine, this is a particular concern for parents of patients with EOE. So endoscopic biopsy is a standard for diagnosing EOE and GERD at the beginning. So it is a method used to diagnose the diseases. But the endoscopic biopsy has significant challenges for routine monitoring and follow-up. As you can imagine, the cost of endoscopic biopsy is quite substantial. A recent article totaled the cost for a pediatric endoscopic biopsy at over $9,000. Further, endoscopic biopsy requires sedation. It requires specialized facilities, personnel, and equipment. And then lastly, it is a biopsy technique. It's a pinch biopsy technique, which for conditions like EOE, which manifest in a heterogeneous fashion, sort of in a all over the esophagus, the pinch biopsy samples less than 0.01% of the surface area of the esophageal mucosa. So there's a good chance that the biopsy may in fact miss where the disease is manifesting. So our method addresses every single one of these issues. So the esophageal string test involves a capsule. It has a string wound inside it. The subject swallows the capsule, and the string unwinds in the esophagus and the stomach. The capsule dislodges from the string and is eliminated as part of regular food elimination. The string is kept in place for an hour, and this can be done in the doctor's office. And after an hour, the string is removed, and the contents of the string, the mucosal contents, are sent to a lab for a lab-developed test. And so the lab-developed test evaluates two biomarkers, MBP1, major basic protein 1, and eotaxin 3. These two markers have been shown to be essentially replicative of biopsy results. This is a published paper from Dr. Faruda's group showing equivalence between the esophageal string test result and the biopsy result. Further, we've also published results showing exceptional patient and parent interest in the test. So over 98% of pediatric patients and over 95% of parents of these patients had preference to use the esophageal string test over the endoscopic biopsy. The market for frequent non-invasive monitoring for EOE and GERD is also quite substantial. If we assume a test of $650 for the esophageal string test, the total United States market is in fact over $20 billion. Our company has had substantial traction over the last few years, so this summarizes both our traction and our business plan. So during the first years of founding, 2013 to 2017, we received some funding from the Children's Hospital of Colorado, a top 10 children's hospital, to begin our company. We also received some grant funding. We used this money to establish the science to begin a 5-center FDA phase 2 clinical trial. We also received our first 2 patents, and we also received clearance on the device at that time as well. We received some additional funding from Children's Hospital as well. We used that to get approval of the assay, get a 3rd patent, and obtain the reimbursement code for the assay. In 2019, we published the phase 2 results of 143 subjects, both adults and pediatrics, showing excellent correlation between between biopsy and the esophageal string test results. We also received our 4th patent issued, and we started engaging large strategics in anticipation of potential exits. So where we are now is we're seeking our next round of funding. There have been over 20 papers that have been published confirming the value of the esophageal string test. We have a reimbursement process in place, and we have secured our first clinical contract as well with a major hospital. So in 2021, we will use the $3.5 million funding that we are seeking primarily in this category right here to drive sales in pediatric EOE. So our anticipation as we go into the next couple of years is to expand our sales in pediatric EOE, but also position the company really well for expansion to other indications, GERD, microbiome, and so forth. So why Entero Track? As I mentioned, so we've achieved substantial traction. We have research and clinical sales already. We have an experienced leadership team with multiple prior exits. We have 4 granted patents, a substantial amount of intellectual property that protects our method, our device, our assay, our manufacturing, and so forth. We're looking at a $3.5 million deal to accelerate funding, to accelerate and expand marketing and sales and reduce the assay cost. As I said, we have engaged several large strategics. We have 17 NDAs that we've signed already. We have ongoing conversations with J&J and Medtronic, and both have expressed interest in the technology. So I thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Robin, so much for being here tonight, and thank you for presenting Entero Track for us. Sounds like a really interesting technology. We do have a couple of questions. So the first one, how does a positive test result help indicate the location of a lesion? And I would add, does that matter? And then does the individual then need to have an endoscopic biopsy at some point as well?
Yeah. So great question. So the location of the lesion, as far as I understand, doesn't matter. We have Dr. Furuta, who's the world's leading expert in the disease and who is our CMO as part of the panel as well. And he can certainly weigh in. But the location it doesn't matter as much as the fact that you want to sample as much of the esophagus as you can. So our string samples both the proximal side of the esophagus and the distal side of the esophagus. And so you have a really good chance of contacting mucosal samples that express those biomarkers of disease. And so your probability of capturing the right biopsy sample that allows you to make, the right mucosal sample to allow you to make clinical decisions increases. So what do you do with that result? So the idea is that, so we're not saying that this test will diagnose definitively the disease. So we are positioning it as a way to monitor the disease after definitive diagnosis. So the patient has been diagnosed with EOE. Now the clinician, the parents, the patient need to understand, are there particular food allergy triggers, that manifest, that increase inflammatory status of the esophagus. So maybe you put the patient on some kind of food elimination diet. But obviously, if you put the patient on the food elimination diet, it makes no sense to bring them back for routine endoscopies and all the trauma and other issues involved with that. But with our string device, you can pop it in there very easily. Like I said, it can be done in the doctor's office, and you get much quicker kind of sense of what's happening in the esophagus. And so I'll stop there. I'm happy to kind of keep going and.
No. I think that was great. I have a few other questions too. So we'll try and go for some brief answers to these so we can get to all of them. Dr. Furuta, by the way, did answer that the location does not matter where the lesion is because you're primarily checking for inflammation in those cases. So other questions that we have here, this goes to, so a couple people asked about other uses, and I know you briefly touched on this, but then specifically, are there biomarkers for Barrett's esophagus was a specific question to that. So maybe talk generally about other use cases and then specifically about biomarkers for Barrett's esophagus, if that's a possibility.
Yeah. And so there are, in fact, several other applications, including potentially Barrett's. So let me talk about the additional applications first. So there's, in fact, 2 papers that are published that show that the string is, in fact, very, very useful as a way to capture the gut microbiome, a very different way of capturing the gut microbiome than using fecal samples. So there's been some interest from a variety of sources for our company to look at this as a way of capturing gut microbiome. We've sold a number of these devices to GlaxoSmithKline as part of their non-invasive biocollection for ADME studies, for pharmaceutical studies. So anytime you want to evaluate drug-drug interactions, collection and evaluation of bile content is very important. And our method allows a very easy way of collecting bile. So we actually have ongoing sales to GlaxoSmithKline for that. And it seems like other pharmaceutical companies might be very interested. H. pylori, Helicobacter pylori testing is also something that the device could be used for. And certainly at home screening and testing, it could be used. This is a picture of me that I swallowed this device yesterday and in my kitchen. It's very straightforward to use. As I said, it can be done at home. So now going to other things, including GERD and the spectrum of GERD within Barrett's as well. So this is, in fact, exactly one of the things that this device could be used for. The fact that we can collect mucosal samples very easily from the esophagus means that you can routinely follow patients with GERD, evaluate whether PPI therapies are in fact working or not, and then certainly kind of have an early indication of whether that patient is on the track to Barrett's or not, right? So you have an early indication of that. And the value that we bring is that you can do this very often. You can do this a couple of times a month, once every 2 months. It's a very simple test to do. And so that's the real value here.
Great. Thank you so much for going into that. Well, Robin, I think we're out of time, but we, again, appreciate you for being here. There were a couple of other questions that came through that I know we did not get to today. And that brings me to something that I will repeat here a couple times throughout the evening. For those of you that are attending Pitch Club, we do have a LinkedIn group specifically for Pitch Club. And we would be really excited for everyone to join us. I'm going to put a QR code in the chat so you can do that straight from this event. And then we can continue answering those questions in that LinkedIn group. So thank you all that put questions in the Q&A for us. We really appreciate it. The next thing we're going to have you do essentially is we're going to have you guys do a little Zoom polling feedback for us. And so, oh, there's my timer. And so we have put that poll up, and this is your opportunity to give feedback to Robin and Entero Track about how you think they did tonight. Again, this is kind of the quick and dirty feedback form that we've put together, and we will take all of this feedback and give it to our companies and the CEOs, because part of what this is all about is really giving them an opportunity to get some feedback from our clinical members. So thank you so much again for filling out the poll. We want as many people to give us feedback as possible. So please, please, please answer the poll questions. And while you're continuing to do that, Jennifer is going to talk to us about a specific opportunity called the AngelMD Clinical Advisory Boards.
Thank you, Katie. So our clinical advisory boards are basically, there are several areas that we really would like to get the perspective of you, our clinicians, about your specialties. And so we actually have a clinical advisory board for each of the different specialties. And what this really involves is we do 4 meetings a year where we have an opportunity for our team and specifically people who are managing the funds and involved in the process of evaluating companies to determine what we're investing in, being able to get input from you on what's going on within your specialty, what are challenges you're facing, what are opportunities, what's the environment look like, what are things or problems that would be great value to be able to get solutions for. And so just that's information that just helps us as non-clinicians to be able to have a better perspective and insight. And then the other piece or primary piece is that we do look to our clinical advisory boards first for doing more in-depth evaluations of companies. So our first step before we consider investing in any company is to get these evaluations from, again, you, the clinician. So the majority of the time, you're making the decisions on products that you're going to be using, services that are going to be valuable for your practice or for your business. And so we want to make sure that we're getting your input and perspective evaluating these companies. And so we do look to our clinical advisors to provide that. So we're looking at about 4 quarterly meetings a year. And then we do have the evaluations. We also welcome you to invite other physicians that you think would be great additions to it. And if you know startups that that you think would be valuable to bring onto the AngelMD network, we certainly want to hear about that from you. And that's basically the gist of it. So if it's something that you're interested in doing and participating in, we will send as part of our follow-up email tomorrow information on the clinical advisory board so that you can just send us your information and your interest in it, and we'll make sure that we will get you invited. We are actually holding kind of kickoff meetings all this week, and so if you're able to let us know, we can make sure you get the invite for your specific advisory board.
Great. Thank you for doing that. And thank you to those of you that filled out our poll and gave feedback to Entero Track. Again, Robin, thank you so much for being here and pitching your company. We really appreciate it. We are going to move on to our second company of the evening. So we have Dr. Steve Porter, and he is the CEO of RiskLD. And again, we have Dr. Tig Parrish, who is going to help us with the Q&A with this one. So thank you as well for being here. And I'll turn it over to Dr. Porter.
Sorry, I just had to unmute there for a second. Let me share again.
Perfect.
Can everyone see?
We can. Looks great.
Great. I'm Dr. Steve Porter. I'm a practicing obstetrician and also the CEO of RiskLD. We're a software company that integrates with the inpatient EMR and provides early alerting and clinical decision support at the point of care on labor and delivery. So this is the problem we're facing. The United States has the highest maternal mortality rate of any industrialized nation. And despite the availability of clinical best practices and maternal safety bundles, it's a problem that's getting worse year after year. And when we break this problem down by the numbers, we know that the majority, over 60% of pregnancy-related deaths are preventable. And many of these relate to errors that happen on labor and delivery units. What's more, there are profound racial disparities in maternal health outcomes. Women of color in this country are 3 to 4 times more likely to die during their pregnancies than their white counterparts. And so what's missing? How do we change the paradigm, provide safer obstetric care, and turn the tide on this maternal health crisis? The answer is technology. We've developed a software platform that addresses the 2 underlying causes for why errors happen on labor and delivery units: not knowing about a problem and not knowing how to manage it appropriately. Our software solution does 4 things. It monitors mom and baby continuously from the moment the patient arrives on labor and delivery until she's discharged from the postpartum floor. It will suggest diagnoses to consider in real time. It will provide alerts about the presence of high-risk conditions, and it will issue real-time evidence-based clinical decision support. So how do we do that? The system captures over 130 data feeds from different parts of the electronic medical record and uses that to provide alerting and decision support. And there are 2 main views of the software, which we're looking at on this slide. On the left-hand portion of the slide is the unit level view. And this view gives us a glimpse of all the patients that are on the labor floor at a given time. And it generates alerts to indicate the patients who might need some extra attention. So this is a tool that's used by the leadership of the unit, the charge nurse and the attending physician, to identify patients with developing issues and allocate resources accordingly. On the right-hand portion of the slide is the patient level view. And this view is accessible as a tab in the patient's chart in the EMR. And essentially what we've done here is consolidated all of the relevant fetal information and all of the relevant maternal information, and we're projecting it onto a single user interface that provides alerting and decision support for high-risk conditions. We now have commercial-grade software that's live as an app in the Epic App Orchard, and we have access to over 100 clinical practice guidelines to guide obstetric treatment. A little bit more about our clinical practice guidelines. The RiskLD clinical practice guidelines have been associated with improved patient outcomes. And they were developed over the past 10 years by the OB Quality Unit at University Hospitals in Cleveland, Ohio. Beginning in 2010, the unit started investigating the root causes underlying adverse obstetric outcomes and started rolling out paper-based clinical practice guidelines to standardize obstetric care. Over the past decade, as they have implemented these paper-based guidelines, they have seen a 92% reduction in their serious safety events on labor and delivery units. Now, just a little bit about that metric. A serious safety event is defined as an adverse maternal or neonatal outcome where the standard of care was not met and the level of harm to patient was death or severe disability. So over the past decade, they've seen this 92% reduction in serious safety events and also a 93% reduction in their obstetric litigation costs, from a peak of $16 million back in 2010 to at or below $1 million over the last 5 years running. And all of these guidelines have been exclusively licensed to RiskLD. This is a look at our pipeline. We are now live at 5 hospitals in Northeast Ohio. We are also standing up a remote monitoring center where, from a centralized command center, we'll be able to monitor in real time outlying community hospitals. Think of the EICU model, but applied to labor and delivery. Now, this is particularly interesting to some rural health systems, and it's worth noting that 60% of births in the US occur at hospitals that do fewer than 3 deliveries per day. We're in the process of launching pilots at 3 health systems. Contra Costa Regional Medical Center is a safety net hospital in the East Bay of California, staffed mainly by family medicine physicians. The University of Massachusetts Network in Western Massachusetts, and UT Southwestern or Parkland, which is the largest birthing center in the United States. And you can see the rest of the pipeline here. It's worth noting that there's increasing national attention on maternal mortality and specifically racial disparities in maternal health outcomes. And RiskLD is incredibly well positioned in these discussions. In March of this year, Senator Kamala Harris, together with Representatives Alma Adams and Laura Underwood, introduced the Momnibus, a package of legislation comprised of 8 interrelated bills, all of which are focused on improving maternal health outcomes and reducing disparities in maternal health outcomes. In April of this year, RiskLD met with the congressional office for the 3 Momnibus co-sponsors. And in May, we provided descriptive language for inclusion in the Momnibus bills, specifically underscoring the importance of access to early alerting systems, remote monitoring tools, and clinical decision support mechanisms on labor and delivery units. We have now engaged with health systems in the jurisdictions of the 3 Momnibus co-sponsors and are positioning ourselves as part of the solution to the US maternal health crisis. We are extending the close of our $1.5 million bridge round, during which we were delighted to welcome the former head of obstetrics at the Cleveland Clinic, and also Medical Mutual of Ohio as our first institutional investor. They're a leading commercial health insurance provider in Northeast Ohio. In the lead up to our Series A, and our strategy here is to first obtain commitments from respected families to participate in the Series A. And once these commitments are in place, we'll approach a digital health or hospital affiliated venture fund to lead the deal. It's important to note that the Series A monies will be put to use for marketing and distribution. We have commercial grade software and our software development is complete. Our team is led by 3 OBs who collectively have over 60 years of experience in clinical obstetrics, OB quality and patient safety, and malpractice litigation. Our CTO has over 30 years of experience in software development, and RK Khosla and Dan Kellogg, who's our board member, together ex-venture capitalists and serial healthcare entrepreneurs. We're really excited by what we've built, and we're delighted to have you join us and welcome your questions.
Great. Thank you, Steve, again for being here to give this pitch. I'm going to throw out there before I turn things over to Dr. Parrish that we would love anyone that has questions for Steve and RiskLD to go ahead and put those in the Q&A function. And I know that Tig also has a few questions of her own, so I will turn it over to you to start with.
Thanks, Katie. Steve, this is super exciting. I think anybody in OBGYN or even sort of paying attention to national news knows that this is a huge issue, and different methods have been suggested of how to solve it. And one of the things that I really like about what you presented was how this would help smaller community hospitals, because it's one way, you know, there are some methods to solve it in big academic or hospitals where we're doing a lot of deliveries a day, but a solution that would work for that as well as for smaller community hospitals where they may not have the kind of expertise or resources to address some of the issues that we know in labor and delivery come up super fast, and you have to take action immediately. Otherwise, you end up with adverse outcomes. We do have one question in the chat that I'm just going to ask, and then I have some other questions as well, which says, is there statistical data on how many L&D errors occur and how many result in mortality?
It's a great question. I'm not aware of good data. When you look at that figure of the 60% of pregnancy-related deaths are preventable, to parse that out to the percentage of that that's specifically attributed to errors, that hasn't really been well studied to my knowledge.
And I think one of the issues is some of that funding that that came, or some of the bill, I don't know if it was part of the omnibus bill or work, but is sort of funding. We had in Colorado some funding specifically focused around collecting maternal mortality data. And I think that work was really led in California, and more states are doing it, and we just need more data to figure out how to solve this problem. So one question I had for you has to do with the EMR. Is this a platform that would work with a variety of different EMRs, or does it only work with certain EMRs?
It's a great question. I'm going to pull up this slide sort of in our appendix. So what's been really interesting in sort of health IT over the past few years is most of the EMR companies have started standing up these app stores that run on this technology called Smart on Fire. So it's really enabled a scalable platform for delivering this kind of solution, leveraging the EMR as the delivery channel. In other words, 10 years ago, if we wanted to bring this kind of solution to market, it would have been a hospital by hospital integration, where you go to one hospital and you work on site with their IT team for 3 months, 6 months, and then move on to the next hospital. Now that we have this standardized interface through Smart on Fire, we can write code to that standardized interface and then rapidly deploy it through the App Store to any hospital that's on that platform. So now we are approved as an app in the Epic App Orchard. So we're out talking to hospitals that are on the Epic platform, and those hospitals can effectively download our software from the Epic App Orchard. Now, it's not as quick as downloading an application from our phone, but it's sort of a 1-month integration process as opposed to a 6-month one. Now that we're stood up on the Epic App Orchard, we're shifting our attention to Cerner, so that it'll be available on their app store, and then to medtech and Allscripts, and moving forward from there. The idea is to make it accessible to every hospital in the country, but through the EMRs.
Thank you. Katie, we have a bunch of questions. I know we're over our time, so can I run through those, or?
Well, let's take one more question and then we'll answer the rest of them again in our follow-up LinkedIn group. I did put the link in the chat. I'll put it in there again though. So let's do one more question for Steve, and then we will have him answer those questions in the LinkedIn group. So please join us there after the event.
So the next question is, in the minority areas where you mentioned a higher risk, many of these patients have had inadequate prenatal care or even routine care. So I guess in populations of color, prior to pregnancy. So there can't be much data to feed in. How will the system help this population?
Great question. What I will pull up here are essentially the constellation of different feeds that power the solution. So for a patient that has had full prenatal care, we would have access to the full sort of past medical, past obstetric history, everything that is captured in that patient's obstetric profile. If there's nothing, if the patient's had no prenatal care or they've had prenatal care in a different system, we will start capturing data from the moment they arrive on labor and delivery. So that's all the real-time monitoring, the real-time vital signs, their BMI, their cervical dilation, any laboratory results, administered medications or blood products that are transfused. And then you can see all the fetal indicators that we will pull as well. It's worth noting that we will pull these from the EMR, not directly from the fetal monitoring system.
Great. Thank you, Tig, for leading our Q&A there. And thank you again to Steve and RiskLD for being here tonight. Again, we will continue the conversation in our LinkedIn follow-up group. So we look forward to that opportunity. And if you're interested in any of these companies tonight, that's another great place to engage with our founders and CEOs. We're gonna put the poll up so we can get some feedback for RiskLD. And as I mentioned, we would love for anyone and everyone who is in attendance today to give feedback to Steve and RiskLD, because again, these are things that I think help make each of these companies better. And so the more we get that give feedback, the better that feedback is. So please and thank you for filling that out. And while we have that going, we have Tobin, who's back with us live, and he's going to give us an overview of the AngelMD Catalyst 2020 Fund.
Thanks, Dr. Richardson, and good evening to everybody. Thanks for joining us for the Pitch Club tonight. Just a little bit about our newest fund, Catalyst Fund 2020. One of the things that we're very excited about at AngelMD is the ability to introduce funds for our members. We think funds are the most effective way for people to invest in early stage companies, simply because the volatility with early stage companies is high, and individual investors tend to not have the ability to manage that risk and mitigate that risk. A fund allows you to do that because you get the diversification, number one, and number two, you get a professionally managed fund. Our first fund, Catalyst Fund 1, was very successful. Like any fund, like any business, you start out with a hypothesis. And we started out with a concept that we knew AngelMD, leveraging the expertise of our network, both pre-investment and post-investment, was going to yield better outcomes in the companies in that portfolio. And in fact, that fund has shown that. And so that fund is tracking at a 44% internal rate of return. We think it's actually going to go higher. There's some metrics with some companies in there that are accelerating. So based on that success, we're launching our next fund called Catalyst Fund 2020. We refer to it as a vintage fund. This is a fund that will invest in 1 year. All of that capital will be deployed. So we put the money to work rapidly. It is focused on early stage companies. And so most of its investments will be at the seed stage, with some at the early Series A and some follow-on investments. We will be launching other funds over the coming year, some growth stage funds, some specialized funds, but this is a fund we will launch every year focused on seed stages. So we'd love to have you participate. If you've got some interest, when we do the follow-up emails, we'll include some information if you'd like to request some information about that fund. Love to have you involved, but thanks anyway, regardless, for being involved tonight in the Pitch Club event and for being a part of the AngelMD community. Thanks, Dr. Richardson.
Thank you, Tobin. And thanks to all of you who gave us feedback on RiskLD. We really appreciate it. We will again share all of that information with Steve and his team. So it's very meaningful and we appreciate you doing that. So if you signed up for Pitch Club earlier this week, you will note that our third company presenting was going to be Quadrant Biosciences. Well, we had a little hiccup with them today. And so we have a last minute stand-in. And we appreciate Dr. Brian Bagwandan and Recalibrate Solutions for being here tonight. This is another pediatric company, and he's been working hard today to get ready for tonight. So we appreciate that. And the other thing that I will say about Recalibrate Solutions is they're a little earlier than some of our other companies that we tend to put up for pitch night. But because we were excited about this company, despite how early they were, we invited him anyway. And you know what? He stepped up and took it on, and we're excited to hear about your presentation, Brian. So go ahead and put up your slides. I will add, just as a side note, in all transparency, I am actually a physician advisor of Recalibrate Solutions. So I want to put that out there to the whole group. And again, I'm excited about what they're doing as well.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. The two companies that pitched before me are really terrific work that's going on, and it's a bit of a hard act to follow, but I'll tell you what we're doing because we're pretty excited about what we're doing too. My name is Brian Bagwandan. I am the co-founder CEO of Recalibrate Solutions. We have created a stethoscope for stress monitoring in kids And just a little bit of background, in the late 1990s, KP and the CDC did a very large study, the famous ACEs study, or Adverse Childhood Experiences, where they connected the dots between early childhood adversity and lifetime health outcomes. And another finding over the last the intervening 20 years is that ACEs can give rise to something known as toxic stress, which is the unmitigated overstimulation of a child's stress response system. Okay, so what we've learned is that stress in children is not just a psychological problem. It actually changes a child's biology. Over 72% of American children across all socioeconomic lines are affected by ACEs, and ACEs can give rise to and are substantially increased the risk of 7 of the top 10 causes of death in America. And we know that the HPA axis, sometimes known as the stress response system, is stimulated when any individual undergoes a stressful event or activity. And cortisol is the major signal that is seen when the stress response system is activated. What you see on the screen is some data that we've collected and not yet published, looking at the difference between normal and high stress infants and toddlers. And what you'll notice, and if you have any exposure to PTSD, is these data look exactly like combat soldiers who have been diagnosed with PTSD. Unfortunately for these children, it's worse because, as we said before, it's changing their biology. So if we're able to take cortisol as a monitoring, as a biomarker, it allows us to do identification based on science, based on a biomarker, rather than the ACEs study really evaluates risk of an environment as opposed to really looking at biology or physiology. Cortisol also allows early determination of when a child is becoming dysregulated in their stress response system. And the value of that is the earlier we can intervene, the less costly and the less disruptive to the child's overall health outcome. And so let me talk a little bit about the current environment in which we're operating. Somebody brought up the Momnibus. California has also set aside, and Nadine Burke-Harris, as the Surgeon General of California, has advocated, and the state has set aside $100 million to screen every child for toxic stress. In New Jersey, they have created the Office of Resilience within the Department of Children and Families. The American Academy of Pediatrics has published a policy recommending that at every wellness check, toxic stress is screened, or there's some sort of screen for toxic stress. And finally, we at Recalibrate Solutions were contacted by the National Maternal and Health Bureau to include cortisol measurement within home visitation programs. Lancet Magazine recently, their public health edition of their magazine estimates that the North American healthcare system spends about $748 billion every year addressing the issues associated with early childhood adversity. So let me talk about our solution. It is simple, elegant, fast, and gives test results within 5 minutes, requires a small saliva sample. We've been using about 100 microliters in our prototype. It's disposable, and we estimate that cost of goods for this disposable test is going to be somewhere around $2 to $3. There are 74 million kids in the United States. If we do a stress assessment on a quarterly basis, we're looking at somewhere between a $5 and $6 billion total addressable market. We're looking to to change the way we think about healthy child development, and we want to include stress health monitoring within wellness checks. As far as our calendar and milestones, in the past, up to this point, we've raised about $170,000. We've built a prototype. We've done some market research. We are very soon going to open a seed round to customize a reader and integrate a sample collector into our test and optimize the assays so we can start field studies. And finally, prior to launch, we will do another round that will allow us to complete our clinical studies and submit for our regulatory filing. So we hope that you're as excited as we are about this and want to partner with us. So we will take questions at this point.
Great. Thank you, Brian, for being here tonight and for sharing your story and the story of Recalibrate Solutions. I have a couple of questions for you just around, I think you mentioned, you know, routine wellness visits as a primary location for testing. Are there other places where you think this might be utilized, this type of test might be utilized?
That's a great question. And we have really tried to stay focused on the clinic, but we see potential for applications in, well, as the National Maternal and Child Health Bureau came to us in wellness visits, with social workers, with mental health counselors, with schools, and even with parents. But we see our beachhead really as the clinic to establish a foothold.
Great. And another question, can you speak a little bit to the, I guess, sensitivity across different individuals and what you have, sorry about that, what you have found in your early studies and with your working prototype, what is the sensitivity across different individuals?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So just looking at your, and maybe you showed it in one of your slides as far as your bench, how reproducible are these responses that you've been getting?
Well, you know, the normal ranges are change from with children depending on their age, and they range from about 0.3 to 3 micrograms per deciliter, and there's a boundary where you can go too high, and also a boundary where you can go too low with children. And so, as you start to overstimulate the HPA axis, you start to see a flood of free cortisol in the system. As the system begins to be fatigued and overwhelmed, it begins to shut down, and you start seeing extremely low values. And that's what you're seeing here in this particular graph that's shown. I don't know if that answered your question. As far as repeatability, we're definitely seeing good repeatability. We're seeing good sensitivity. And we've demonstrated that our test is running within 5 minutes of a time of sample on the test.
Fabulous. That's exactly what I was trying to say or trying to get at. So both of those were helpful. One other question that I have is around, you know, what is your competition out there?
You know, there's a lot of interest in stress. There is very little, and to my knowledge, really no FDA cleared product that can really meet the need of the market. Here are some of the, I would say, consumer products that are available in the marketplace, that some of them are really more surrogates for stress. And there's all kinds of errors that come up when you start monitoring things like heart rate or blood pressure or even temperature, you may feel stressed and you may have just gone to the gym. So those markers may actually lead you in the complete opposite direction of where you're going. And that's why we felt it was necessary to really start looking at a true biomarker for the stress system. But it really needs to be fast, and it needs to be inexpensive, and it needs to be reliable.
Great. Thank you again, Brian, for being here tonight and for talking to us about Recalibrate Solutions. We really appreciate you pinch hitting on such short notice. And we are quickly trying to put together a poll so we can get feedback on Recalibrate Solutions as well. In the meantime, because we have a couple of extra minutes, I am going to put again in our chat kind of what the follow-up here is for each of these companies that presented tonight. So you can use the link that I have put in the chat to join our LinkedIn group. We will also send a follow-up email tomorrow, which essentially has several different things. One, it will give you a copy of the video that we have created of Pitch Night. So if you want to share that on social media, that will be available. We will also have, if it's easier to leverage a QR code to sign up for the LinkedIn group, that's great. In the meantime, we're going to take the additional questions that we got for each of these companies, and we're going to have them answer those companies for us. So we appreciate everyone who took the opportunity to put some questions into the Q&A, and we will again have our CEOs answer those questions, and we will put those in the LinkedIn, the answers to those in the LinkedIn group. We also would encourage you in that LinkedIn group to further investigate. If you have more questions about what each of these CEOs and their companies are doing, I think that is a great place to do that. Also, we're going to send out some information about what Jennifer talked about as far as the clinical advisory boards are concerned. And again, you can contact either Jennifer or I if you are interested or have other physicians that might be interested in joining one of our boards, as well as Tobin gave us some information about the AngelMD Catalyst 2020 fund, and we will send information out about that in our follow-up email as well. All right, Jennifer, here's my question for you. Are we close, or should we send something out afterwards?
Apologies, I am close, but it's probably going to take a couple minutes, so I will unfortunately have to send it out. We will include it in the email, and we can actually send something out tonight. Brian, I apologize, you worked so hard, but unfortunately, once we had things set up, we weren't able to make the change. But we will send you all a form so that you can give feedback, and we would really appreciate if you just take, it should only take a couple minutes, just like these polls did, to get your input.
Fantastic. Well, we appreciate, again, you, Jennifer, trying to make it happen. And again, when you have a last minute switch, like this is the way sometimes things go. I want to give a huge thank you again to our three companies tonight. We had Robin Shandis with Entero Track, we had Steve Porter with RiskLD, and we had Brian Bagwanden with Recalibrate Solutions. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all of our attendees for being here tonight. And I want to also give a special thanks to Dr. Tig Parrish for being our women's health expert here for this evening. You added a lot to the conversation, so thank you for that as well. And I hope everyone has a great night. We would love to see you in 2 weeks. Our next pitch night is on robotics in healthcare. So, and then we have 2 more after that to complete the year. One is going to be innovative uses of telehealth. And the last one is going to be an AngelMD showcase, and that's going to showcase some of the previous investments that AngelMD has made in startups, kind of a where are they now kind of pitch event. So that'll be really exciting and interesting as well. And you can sign up for all of those events on our AngelMD website. So we hope to see you at future events. And thanks again to everybody. Have a great night. Thanks for being here.